Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Big Sky Now Football Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Amick, with my co-host, as always, Fritz Neighbor and John Allen. We got a lot to talk about as the spring game for the Griz kicked off over the weekend, well, Friday to be exact. But then also, we're just about 9-10 days away from the NFL draft. So there are some prospects out there that we want to kind of dive into and do our best mock draft impressions and see where these guys might end up or who has the best possibilities of getting drafted. And then we'll be back a week after that to see what ended up happening. So, Fritz, you were there at this game. Let's get right into it. What did you see from the Griz in the spring game, and what did you think maybe stood out to you or maybe was kind of a shock to you?
Well, I was kind of shocked by how many touchdowns there were. Usually spring games are pretty hard to cover because there's not a whole lot of highlights. And perhaps because, as I wrote, every defensive starter for the Grizzlies has to be replaced. From 2024, there was plenty of big plays. Logan Flowers had a 70-yard bomb, dropped it perfectly on the speedster's hands, Blake Stevens, I think his name is. And the new quarterback, Jensen out of USC, looked pretty sharp. He looked taller than 6'1", although he's got a lot of hair, so maybe that's why he looked taller. But he's pretty stout, and I thought he looked pretty sharp. The O-line was opening holes for a lot of guys. Thought it was interesting because, I talked to Dylan Botner from Whitefish on Monday because he was granted an extra year of eligibility because he missed that season where the Griz surged into the title game, the FCS title game.
Mm-hmm.
And so, while he waits to see if he gets into med school, he gets to play another year. So unbeknownst to me, they were playing him at center and instead of tackle. So then he played a bunch of snaps at center on Friday, and the line looked good. And then Monday, we find out that Kate Klimzak, the starting center from last year, also has another year of eligibility getting back. So he'll be back. So I guess Dylan moves back to tackle. I'm not sure. I know every time his name came up, Bobby Howe kind of couched it. We're not sure where he's going to play. I thought that was interesting. Another guy that I liked was Tommy Running Rabbit. He's a redshirt freshman out of Browning. He had 8 carries on Friday, and he looked good. And I was thinking that might be the most carries he's had in a game. But it turns out his sophomore year, he ran for a ton of yards. He had a few carries, but it was the most carries he had since then, except for one game. One game his senior year, he had 13 carries for Browning. And then Friday, he had 8, and he averaged about 5 a pop. He's 210 pounds, and he's pretty quick through the hole. And he's a walk-on, and they're going to probably bring in a bunch more portal guys. In the meantime, the window opens today, or no, tomorrow. Tomorrow.
Yep.
And so who knows where he'll be a year from now, but I think Bobby likes him, and he thinks he'll stick around and should stick around.
John, I know that we've kind of talked about it. Some of the players that you were hoping to see make an impact. One of the people that we talked about was the Eastern transfer, Michael Wortham. Did you have a chance to see anything from him that stood out to you, or something that may be exciting, a new little element to the Grizzlies offense?
I didn't. I mean, Fritz was the one who was out there watching the game on the sidelines and everything. It was a little more difficult for me to see it over here in Kalispell, but I reading a lot about it. Just Michael Wortham had a nice little end around run there. I think it was about 33 yards for a score. So I like what he brings to the team, just in kind of versatility. You lose Junior Bergen in your punt return, you get an all-American punt and kick returner back in there who you can also throw out at wide receiver, bring him in motion, all sorts of things like that. So I just like to see what he adds to it, and that was a good sign right there from the beginning. I'm glad that Fritz brought up Tommy Running Rabbit, because when I was reading about that as well, I like the fact that the Griz seem to have reloaded the running back depth. You lose Nick Osmo, and but you've got Eli Gilman, you've got Malai Fanati, you've got Stevie Rocker Jr., you've got Tommy Running Rabbit. So there's plenty of guys back there. It's going to be another year of no one running back being overworked. Keep them healthy, and I know Bobby likes to kind of run 3 to 4 running backs in a game if he can. So that was nice to see. And the defense, I think, is just another interesting point because, like Fritz mentioned, it's going to be all new. So I think I saw 2 interceptions, both on Flowers, at least that I saw in some of the write-ups. So and then there's that second portal.
Yeah,
Good.
by two guys that weren't on the roster that was handed out to us on Monday. And so, I just know it's such a roster that's in flux. One guy on defense I meant to mention was Cade Cutler, the Peaburg kid, who started his career at MSU and transferred back over. And he seemed to be around the ball a lot. He led his team in tackles with 5. And and then while we're on the subject of spring games, one of last year's quarterback, Logan Fife, has already been named the starter at New Mexico State.
Hmm.
I didn't know you could do that in spring ball, but
Yeah.
apparently you can.
Yeah, I kind of want to dive a little bit deeper into that, Fritz. I know that this was a hot topic in last year's episodes with the podcast. Is just, or they already said all offseason, Hawk said that he was going to bring in competition at the quarterback spot. I know it's spring game. It's you don't want to look too deep into it. But were you impressed from Jensen? Do you think he's going to give Ayat a run for his money at that quarterback spot?
Yeah, definitely. And it didn't help that I think Ayat was a little banged up. A hamstring or a quadriceps was hurting him. His leg was pretty heavily wrapped, so he wasn't quite as mobile. He was 4 for 5 passing, and he does what he does. I think he's a pretty well known quantity. He just hasn't stayed very healthy. And I just thought Jensen looked pretty good again against a defense that's really being retooled, every day. And I think the other thing we need to mention is they're on the Griz are on their 3rd O-line coach in 3 seasons now. So
yep.
The one guy left for Central Michigan, so they brought in a new guy from Kennesaw State, and the O-line looked pretty good.
That's good.
Be that as it may.
I kind of wanted to throw a question out there to you, Fritz, as well, because I saw you mention it in your article, and I read a little bit about it before going into it. How different was the spring game in terms of how it was played? I know it's usually like all offense versus all the defense, and it seemed like they drafted out 2 different teams there. So how was it different than, I guess, a normal spring game that you've seen?
Yeah, I think it helped keep play moving. Everybody went full tempo, so they worked in, I think it was 82 snaps in 75 minutes, and we're not counting the 3 or 4 punts they got in, or the 4 or 5 field goals they tried. And they drafted. They had the seniors hold a draft, and each guy got to pick a quarterback and his running backs, and maroon versus silver. And I thought it was a good way to go. I think it used to be that way under Don Reed. Well, actually, under Don Reed, they had alumni games, but for 3 years. And I just think that's a better way to do it. Make it a little bit more of a team-wide competition. You have offense and defense on silver rooting for each other instead of against each other, which led to, I think, a couple dust-ups through the years on those fields, on those final games. So, yeah, I liked it.
Good. So we did kind of talk about the quarterbacks in that spring game. What I want to pivot to now is probably the quarterback who has the highest expectations of getting actually drafted has been Tommy Mellott. I did see a tweet this morning, or an X, whatever you want to call it, this morning, about him meeting with the Cincinnati Bengals. There was 2 other teams as well mentioned that having pre-draft visits with Tommy Mellott. Seemed like he had a really great pro day, kind of raised his stock. Yet a lot of different experts, a lot of different sites have him projected anywhere between a 5th and 7th round pick. So we could talk about Mellott, but what other players are you thinking have the best chance to get drafted in the NFL? And who is someone that you think we'll get into the non-drafty invites later, but who are some of the people that you think in the Big Sky Conference has a good chance to get drafted in this year's upcoming draft?
Well, I think an obvious one is Marcus Ware. He's a Hero has him as their number 3 prospect out of the FCS. It seems clear that he's going to get drafted. I looked, 12 FCS players were drafted last year, which isn't very many. So if you're kind of up there in the rankings as far as the prospects this year, I know Hero Sports listed 19. I think Marcus Ware at Montana State is one, and another offensive lineman, Jackson Slater, out of Sac State, is right behind him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then, I saw Efton Chisholm 3 on the list. The Eastern Washington receiver was so good. I didn't think he had very good numbers out of his pro day, but lots of guys don't really have huge numbers. Not only Cooper Kupp had great numbers,
Mhm.
and look at him now. And there's other guys that I really like, and one of the guys that's pretty low on the list that I really like is Land Larson, the running back out of Davis. I just think he's tough and quick, can do it all. Caught a ton of passes out of the backfield, and yeah, I think he's going to fit in somewhere. And I think Tommy Mellott will too. I mean, we didn't know. I didn't think he could draft it until he ran a 4.39. That is just blazing fast, and that's the official time. He ran under that hand time. And then his 41-inch vertical, and he went for 43 and barely missed it. 43 would have been best of all the quarterbacks. Do I think he's an NFL quarterback? Probably not. I think he's more of the Julian Edelman type who played quarterback at Kent State and had a lot of great numbers his senior year for a 4-8 Kent State team, and then became just one of the more productive slot receivers NFL's ever seen. I think maybe that's a comparison. I know he's talked to him too, or at least according to Skyline Sports, he's talked with Edelman, trying to gauge how things might go for him.
Johnny, got any thoughts on Mellott?
Yeah, just the Edelman comparison was one thing that kind of stuck out to me as well. I kind of figured I'd see him more as like a Taysom Hill kind of gadget guy for a little
my
while.
comparison.
But yeah, no, I can definitely see the Edelman comparisons, especially like you mentioned, Edelman playing quarterback when he was at Kent State and then making that switch over and being one of the more prolific receivers in Tom Brady's Patriots days. So, but yeah, just looking into it, the numbers at Pro Day were great for him. And will it help him get drafted? That's, yet to be seen. He's definitely one of the guys who's going to be on the list for it. But I don't think I could see him actually being a full-time wide receiver, but that's just me personally. I'm not an NFL scout. I'm not an NFL coach, so I don't know what exactly I'm going to be looking for in that situation. But yeah, I definitely can see him, like you mentioned with Larson too, just fitting in with a team somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's the most. Oh, go ahead, Fritz.
Oh, I was going to say Taysom Hill from
BYU.
Before that.
I don't know. I only got that.
Pocatello. I just wanted to say Pocatello.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I think the fact that he tested so well in the pro day is definitely gonna help him because you can find packages for him. Like I kind of tend to agree that maybe he's not an NFL quarterback, but he's that good of an athlete where you can find ways to get him on the field. However, that's determined will be someone who gets paid way more than I do, and they know more about this than I do. But I think he is a good enough athlete to find a way onto an NFL roster and to find a way into a couple packages per game. And maybe if, like Fritz said, maybe if he goes the Edelman route, then he's opening up a whole new list of possibilities for himself because he was obviously a really good quarterback at the college level. So maybe him making that transition will help. But we'll see. Some other players I did want to talk about on the list. I know Fritz mentioned Marcus Ware. I think that's a really solid pick. He's going to be up there. Someone else I talked about, though, I know, Fritz, you brought him up a lot during the season. Brody Grebe, Montana State. So far, the draft scout has him as one of the top 10 better prospects coming out of the Big Sky Conference. Do you think he's someone who could be drafted, or do you think he is more someone who might get the undrafted signee invite?
I think he's almost assuredly an undrafted free agent.
Okay.
But I also really have good feelings about him sticking with somebody. His numbers were great. He's a productive player. He's a winner, and he wants it. I think he's of all the guys. I think it's him and Junior Bergen that will probably get missed by the draft, but will get a really, really good shot to impress somebody in mini camps and from then on out.
What do you think, John?
Yeah, I'm kind of on board with that there. I think, it like Fritz mentioned, there's only 12 players from last year that were from the FCS that got drafted. The numbers, it seems to keep dropping, especially as the transfer portal and more players keep going up to the high major schools out of the FCS level. So kids that do spend 4 years down in the FCS don't seem to, get as much traction in that. But I definitely think once you get that ability to go in there and show your stuff in a camp during the off season, it just allows a much better spot for some of these kids to be able to show that they can compete with the NFL talent at all levels. So I think Brody will be one of them. Bergen is another one that I don't think that he will end up getting drafted, although on his pro day, another great day. I think he went 19 of 19 on catches. So showing that it's more than just the return skills for him in that. And I'm sure that he's really thanking the University of Montana for building that bubble and not having to worry about conditions at this point.
No, I do. I want to follow up with him because uh, his accolades kind of speak for themselves. But when I look at a player like Junior Bergen, I immediately think of teams like being biased right here, but the 49ers, the Miami Dolphins, these teams that run a bunch of motion and they get a bunch of movement going on. And with his just athletic ability, he could find his way onto the field. And I see it every year with these Blazers who are just punt and kick returners. They make a roster because of how good they are just on the special teams end. I think if he can just make that his niche and just focus on that, it'll really matter. But I think one of these teams who like to use, like they call it, positionless players, I think Bergen could actually fit onto one of those teams. And yeah, I tend to agree. I don't think he'll be drafted, but I think kind of like Mellott, where it's like you have such a specific skill set that the right coaches, the right teams are going to find a way for you to get on the field. And I know you guys have got to watch him firsthand these last couple of years. So what do you think that's the route he goes? It's just a specialized punt return player? Do you think he can find his way onto the field as a receiver as well?
The one name that I would kind of throw out there, and it's also another big former Big Sky player, would be something like Rashid Shaheed,
Yeah.
who's, was a return specialist with Weber State and has
Yeah.
found himself working into the wide receiver core with the New Orleans Saints.
But Shaheed has got like blazing speed, if I remember correctly. I don't think Bergen's that fast, but he has the same kind of skill set. But yeah, go ahead, Fritz. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think Bergen's one of those guys. Like, I mean, not to compare him to Jerry Rice, but Jerry Rice's numbers weren't great, but you just never saw anybody catch him from behind. So I don't remember seeing Bergen get caught from behind very often, if at all. And I think he's a free agent probably, but I think he can. I think he can stick. And I don't know. There's a lot of good football players out of the Big Sky, and I think he's one of the best. And you know, while we're on the subject, I think Rex Connors, that Davis safety, was a really good player. And I was going to mention Marcus Harris. He was at Idaho, and he spent last season with Cal, and he ran a 4.45 at the combine. So that's another guy with Big Sky roots that I think will get drafted. And I should mention Brandon Casey, who's an all-conference alignment for the Griz. I wonder if he might not land a free agent contract as well.
Yeah, according to this website that I found, Draft Scout, he is literally the 12th ranked player coming out of the Big Sky. So he's right on that cusp of if we're going off of the numbers from last year, 12 players. He fits in right there. Someone I want to dive a little bit deeper into, giving some love to Washington, is Efton Chisholm. Fritz, you mentioned his pro day. Do you think his pro day hurt his stock more than it helped him? Or is pro day is really not that big of a deal? Because we saw it with Xavier Restrepo for Miami. He came out later and said I had a hurt hamstring, but he ran like a 4.940. But you watch any Miami Hurricanes games, he has that same kind of speed that you mentioned with Junior Bergen, where it's like he's not getting caught when he's coming out of the slot. Do you think his pro day Chisholm kind of brought him back down a little bit, or do you think what he did on the field will speak for itself?
Well, they still have him as a number 9 prospect. I think he could get drafted. I think even if he doesn't, he's going to really get a good shot because, I mean, his numbers, he was just so productive. I mean, when does Eastern not have a guy like that? But, you can't say it's all system statistics when he's that good. I don't think he really got hurt by it. I think it's one of those things where if you pull a Tommy Mellott and run sub 4.4, you help yourself. If you're on some other surface, maybe they were running outside. I'm not sure where Eastern ran, if they were outside or what. It might have been not prime conditions, and it doesn't really hurt you.
I know, John, you've been high on Efton all year. What do you think? You think he's still going to end up on a team, or do you think he goes the undrafted route like most of these players we kind of think will?
it's always hard to guess with that. I could definitely see a team putting a 7th round flyer, 6th round flyer on him and just taking the chance just because of what, they've seen with how Cooper Kupp came out of Eastern Washington. And you get another guy who's making catches and breaking Kupp's, records in that situation. It's a freebie, I guess, in that situation. So, whereas if you wait and go the undrafted route, he can choose where he wants to go, and in that regard. So I think that there will be one team out there that gives a chance to him, whether it's somebody close like the Seahawks or if it's another NFC or AFC West team. But yeah, I definitely see him ending up on a roster going into fall camps.
Yeah, how funny would that be if Efton Chisholm ends up on the Seahawks next to the guy who's made Eastern Washington famous, Cooper Kupp? That would be kind of a unique story. But before we wrap up this episode, John, off air, you came up with, or didn't come up with it, but you found this very unique situation that Keelan White finds himself in, possibly. I'm assuming he's putting his name in the NFL draft. But if that doesn't happen, break down what you think is going to happen or what the rumors are swirling are about that.
Well, Keelan White and Hayden Harris, both from the University of Montana, they're Canadian citizens, and CFL rules mean that they need to have at least 50% Canadian-born players or Canadian citizen players on their roster. So their draft is also coming up there. Calgary is the #1 overall pick, and I've seen some mock drafts with both Harris and Keelan White going into the first round, and even TSN, the sports network up there in Canada, has Keelan White as high as first overall to Calgary. So maybe a little University of Montana connection there. Dave Dickinson, head coach. I don't know if he's still the GM as well up there. So, but could see another University of Montana player making his way to the Stampeders.
Yeah, Fritz, I want to follow up that topic that John just brought up with that. So Hayden Harris is currently the 14th overall prospect coming out of the Big Sky. Keelan White's way down here. Not way down here. That sounds rude. He's the number 37th guy. So do you think, hypothetically, if White doesn't get drafted, he has a chance to maybe sign with the team undrafted, but the CFL is already speaking of him possibly being a top 5 pick. Do you go the CFL route, or do you think the people just they just go where they want, whether that's the NFL or CFL?
Well, I think, the most glaring example is Alex Singleton. I think you start with the CFL and see how it goes, and if you really excel there, then I think it's that much easier to make a transfer to the NFL. And Alex Singleton, the former Bobcat linebacker, great, started in the CFL and then wound up with the Eagles, and then he's spent the last couple of years with the Broncos. That's Exhibit A. And so if I'm Keelan and I have an iffy chance to maybe make a practice squad in the NFL or get out there and start producing right away on a CFL field, I'd probably go CFL. I think that's what he'll do.
Do you think Hayden Harris is going to do the same thing, or do you think with him being kind of a more touted prospect that Harris ends up on a team for the NFL?
I think the same route for Harris, but
same route. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, is there anything in this, guys? I know it's kind of, we're just like throwing things blindly at a dartboard, seeing how the draft is going to shake up with 262 picks. We don't know. We expect a lot of these guys to get sign with teams after the draft, and then we'll have a lot more clarity about, are these guys good fits? Do we think they make a roster, or we'll see what happens? But anything else you guys want to wrap up saying?
Well, I just kind of wanted to add in there with the CFL aspect is just the Big Sky has had a lot of success when it comes to CFL players. You've had Travis Lulay with BC. I believe his numbers retired with the Lions. Dave Dickinson, as I mentioned, is head coach now with the Stampeders, but had a good long playing career as well after his short NFL time. You've got Vernon Adams still playing up there. He's won multiple Grey Cups, which is the Canadian Championship. Dakota Prue Cup was a quarterback with Montana State for a while. He's still playing up there as a running back. I believe Davis Alexander is his name, from Portland State a few years ago. He's quarterbacking up there. So there's plenty of Big Sky players that have found success up in the CFL.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is going to wrap up this episode of the Big Sky Now Football Podcast. I want to thank my co-hosts, as always, Fritz and John Allen, for joining me today. We will not be back next week as we are getting ready for the NFL draft. We'll be back the week after that to break down the draft and the signees, and hopefully we have enough names by then, because it is a long process. But we'll be back to break that down and see where those people ended up. I want to thank them for joining me today. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you all in just a few weeks on the Big Sky Now Football Podcast. Take care.